Now that the NFL draft is done and dusted, it's time to assess the league offseason today. Today we're focusing on the AFC East, which had two teams draft in the top 10. Bills got the farthest. They won the division, made the playoffs, getting the AFC title game, losing to the Chiefs in Kansas City. All right, let's have a discussion on the AFC East. We've got our draft analyst, Ryan Wilson, and two-time Super Bowl champ, Bryant McFadden. You guys are giving grades for every team so far. Let's start with Buffalo. Ryan, I'm going to give you first word. You're giving a pretty high grade for the Bills here today.
Listen, Tommy, I'm all about the bell curve and making everybody feel good with the summer fast approaching here. But look, the Bills crushed it last weekend in the NFL draft, and they had a pretty good pre-draft process with the free agent signings prior to that. They got Bosa. They signed Josh Palmer from the Chargers. They got Michael Hoyt from L.A. He's going to help along the defensive line as well. And they went into the draft and just crushed every single pick. Started with B-Max guy Maxwell Harrison at the bottom of round one, the cornerback out of Kentucky. Several picks later in round 4, they got maybe the steal of the draft looking back in 2 or 3 years from now, and Deion Walker, the 330-pound, 6'7" defensive tackle out of Kentucky, Maxwell Harrison's teammate there. He had first-round buzz last summer, had a banged-up season and didn't quite play up to expectations, but he has a chance to be a special talent. And they went all defense, those top 4.5, 5 picks there. They said to Josh Allen, you do the heavy lifting. We're going to make this defense better. You take care of the offense. And it's hard not to love what they've done so far.
I love everything about what Buffalo did as well this offseason. Brandon being, once again, a phenomenal offseason game plan. But I didn't go as high as Ryan. I gave the Buffalo Bills a B+, and here's why. Let's highlight the draft, no question. Attacking the defensive side for the Buffalo Bills during the draft was very, very important. And I do believe they will hit on those said players because they were great collegiate players and they have high upside. But the issue for me, Buffalo-wise, they didn't really add any depth to the safety position and, of course, the linebacker position. We all love Matt Milano. We know what type of player he is on the football field, in the locker room. But as of late, he's had issues staying healthy. So just adding more depth to the linebacker position, I think inside linebacker position would have been a big need for them because you never know based on what we've seen in past years with the Buffalo Bills in terms of the inside backers. And you talked about the free agency. Joshua Palmer, I felt like they could have maybe tried to go get a bigger name, but yet and still you pair him up with Josh Allen, we might see the best Joshua Palmer that we've seen throughout his professional career. You talked about Michael Hoyt, and then we can't forget about Larry Ogunjobi. Two experienced high-level defenders on the front, but both players will be suspended. They're going to miss the first month and a half of the season, so that clearly will put more pressure on some of the young guys that they drafted. And then in terms of Joey Bosa, when was the last time we saw Joey Bosa healthy? Stay healthy. He's had issues as well staying healthy, but they definitely got better. But I decided to give the Buffalo Bills a B+ instead of going the A route like Ryan.
R-Dub going great, B-Mac going good, but not great. You guys are both in line with this next team. A+s from both of you. And B-Mac, I'll give you first word. The Patriots, one of the big things coming into the draft was they had a lot of salary cap space. They spent most, not all of it, but they spent most of it. So after the draft, why are you so high on what the Patriots have done this offseason?
They nailed it. They nailed it. And I'm going to say this right now, Tommy and Ryan. If the AFC East, if they're not careful, the New England Patriots could be the second best team in their division, especially if Drake May continues to take steps in the right direction. And here's why I feel that way. You talked about having the most money in terms of cap space. They didn't spend they wasn't careless in their spending. They made strategic moves. Let's hit on the free agents in terms of what they did. Brought back Stephon Diggs. Clearly he's healthy. Clearly he's highly motivated to continue to have an outstanding professional career. In comes Mac Hollins. You add depth to the offensive line and Morgan Moses. But look at the defensive side. That was an area of concern for them. Milton Williams, the most coveted interior defensive lineman, you brought him in. Harold Landry, a double-digit sack guy, and of course he's familiar with Coach Vrabel. Robert Spillane, off-the-ball linebacker, 3-down type of player. Carlton Davis, hit after hit after hit. And then Will Campbell, the best lineman in the draft. Travion Henderson, one of the more explosive running backs. You got him in the second round. I love Kyle Williams, especially his ability to create separation. Joshua Farmer in the fourth. They had an abundance of picks and an abundance of money, and they made sure every move they made improved their team instantly. And for that, those reasons, I gave him an A+.
Tommy, I'm surprised BMAC didn't bring up the assistant trainer they hired, too, because that guy's going to have an impact on what they're doing. He talked about the list of players. And, look, I think it comes down to this, and I think BMAC is exactly right. If you mess around come December, January, this team might have double-digit wins. And I think it starts at the top with Mike Vrabel. Elliott Wolf, obviously, still the GM there. But Mike Vrabel appears to have changed the tone in that locker room in terms of what the expectations are. And he has done more with less in previous stops in Tennessee. And this feels like he's got his franchise quarterback, and all they're doing now is building around him. The last few drafts, they refused to take an offensive tackle. They did that in Will Campbell. We saw Will Campbell's speech after he was selected. He feels like a Hall of Famer just on that speech alone, Tommy. So the arrow's pointing up, as Mike T likes to say about the Steelers, and I feel pretty good about this Patriots team who hit the slide in that post-Tom Brady era.
You get your quarterback and you build around him. All right, let's get to the Jets. B-Mac, you're a tough grader here. A solid B for New York.
Solid B for me. Pipe down, Jets fans. Let me explain why. When you look at the first-round selection, clearly showing up the right side of the offensive line, Ahmed Mimbo was the best option. Definitely a top 10 talent with a high upside. Mason Taylor, I love this game, including the tight end production was something that has been lackluster as of late for the New York Jets. A.Z. Thomas, of course, anytime you get a cornerback from Florida State and he's wearing that number 8 jersey, you better believe he's a baller. The question mark for me, Ryan, Arian Smith in the 4th round. I felt like there were more polished wide receivers that were available, and they decided to go with a guy who clearly had speed, but he was a bit inconsistent, especially in terms of being a reliable pass catcher throughout his time in Athens. So I'm a bit concerned because when you look at what they did via free agency, hitting on Justin Fields, especially for that price, was a great deal. But outside of that, they don't have playmakers at the wide receiver position besides Garrett Wilson. Alan Lazard has an abundance of experience, but do we consider him to be a game breaker, a playmaker? No. So I feel like that was an area of need, especially having a new quarterback in the saddle in Justin Fields to really help his development within the offense. I love everything else they did, but in terms of not really identifying and adding a legit playmaker, either via free agency or via the draft at the wide receiver position, is a big concern for me. And because of that, I basically gave them a B.
Yeah, they had the lowest grade of any team we'll talk about in this division. They gave an A-, and let's be honest, that minus was probably due to us working with Rick Spielman. That was a Rick minus there. So maybe if we're being honest, it's closer to B-Mac's B. But the other thing to keep in mind, and B-Mac talked about Isaiah Thomas, the cornerback they took long, fast, physical, and he is fast. I know he ran a 4.58, but the GPS time on him was closer to 4.4, and I thought that's how he played. But I also have I'm of the same opinion as B-Mac about the Arian Smith selection in the 4th round. If you're looking to get a speedy wide receiver, Arian Smith checks one box, but he had 79 targets and 10 drops, which is a box you don't want to check when you're looking for guys at the top of day 3 to be difference makers, especially, as B-Mac noted, you have Garrett Wilson. Yeah, you signed Josh Reynolds, but is there going to be any difference makers outside that's going to scare a defense? And they weren't quite as active, Tommy, in free agency as some of the other teams in this division. Yes, they got Justin Fields. Offensive line's going to be better. I like those things. But as we sit here, I think they've done the least of any of these teams we'll talk about in the AFC East.
Okay, and then we end with the Dolphins, where B-Mac is a much lower grade than Ryan. And Ryan, you've already declared you lived on A Street, so what, an A for the Fins here?
Yeah, you know that. Come on now. We got to give it an A. I love the Kenneth Grant pick. B-Mac's angry about that Kenneth Grant pick because he wanted it at 21. That's one thing. He wanted the Steelers to get Kenneth Grant, so you may have dinged him for that, Tommy. But the draft, Jonas Savaiinaea, they traded up, had to give up some assets to get him draft-wise, but he's a day-one starter, and they needed that because Tua Tagovailoa, for as good as he is also injury-prone, and when he's not on the field, that team looks completely different. Dante Trader and Jason Marshall, they got some depth in the secondary. I love those players. Nolly Gordon doesn't look like a prototypical Mike McDaniel running back, but he's a between-the-tackles guy who gets in the open field and you don't catch him. Now, they got Ashton Davis, got Ife Melifonwu, they got James Daniel in free agency. Those were the big names, and those aren't quite as splashy as some of the other ones we talked about. But I give them an A because I think they're going in the right direction as long as you keep Tua upright. Now, if that doesn't happen, they could, in fact, be the worst team in this division.
And that's why I gave the Miami Dolphins a C+, because it's about keeping your quarterback upright. When Kenneth Grant was drafted top 15, 13 by the Miami Dolphins, it kind of shook up the draft a little bit because the projections didn't have him going that high. But that was an area of need. But what was more of a need for Miami, the O-line or the D-line? I felt like it was the offensive line because what we saw last year with the Miami Dolphins, when they were dealing with injuries on the offensive line, they had no depth. And because of that, the running game wasn't there. And if the running game isn't there, clearly the passing game would be inconsistent, and that's what we saw. You talked about going up, trading up to go get Jonah. Yes, they knew that was a big need, but you only got one offensive lineman in this draft. Only one offensive lineman in this draft. You took 3 defensive tackles. Hopefully, it better work out well for Miami because if they don't, if the offensive line is not together, they don't have anything offensively. And then the thing about this grade with Miami, they're already trying to trade Jalen Ramsey. What did they do in terms of becoming better at the cornerback position? They drafted Jason Marshall from Florida, but you look at some of the other names, especially if they trade Jalen Ramsey. Stormed up. Cam Smith, who I love coming out of South Carolina, but still unproven. I talked about Jason Marshall, Ethan Bonner. Names that we haven't learned yet because they haven't cemented themselves in the National Football League or better yet for the Miami Dolphins. And if you're a team that has playoff aspirations like the Miami Dolphins will have, you need to find a way to improve the personnel and the talent side of things. And I felt like they dropped the ball in doing so via free agency and, of course, throughout the draft.
Great stuff, fellas. I just would love to have Ryan in community college. I would have gotten done a lot faster than 4 years. Appreciate you, fellas.
And up next, with the draft behind us, still plenty of things up in the air this offseason. Ryan Wilson with 5 potential trades that could really shake things up.